And, okay. 1 Peter chapter 2, we're in verse 13 and 14 again. Wherefore, gird up your loins of your mind, and so forth, and be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ, as obedient children, not fastening yourself according to the former lust in your ignorance, but as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation, because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. What we have been doing then in the last couple of weeks is trying to understand what that means. Holiness it's really necessary. Is it really necessary for a Christian to be holy or to live holy? Is it necessary for a Christian to live holy? And that probably is the question we want to ask ourselves. There is certainly a lot of things I want to say about holiness. Holiness is not a series of do's and don'ts, but conformity to the character of God and obedience to the will of God, accepting with contentment whatever circumstances God allows for me is very much a part of a holy walk. It's not, I don't do this and I don't do that and I don't do this and I do this and I do that. That's not holiness. Holiness is an attitude in your heart towards God. 1 Thessalonians 4, 3 through 7. Paul uses the term in contrast to a life of immorality and impurity. Peter uses it in contrast to living according to the evil desires which we had when we lived outside of Christ. John contrasts one who is holy with those who do wrong and are vile, Revelation 22:11. To live a holy life, then, is to live a life in conformity to the moral precepts of the Bible and in contrast to the sinful ways of the world. It is to live a life characterized by the putting off of your old self, which has been corrupt by the deceitful desires, and putting on, Ephesians chapter 4, verses 22 and 24, putting on new stuff. When you take off the old flesh, you put on a new nature. What you used to do before you were saved, you are transforming into something different. It is putting off and putting on. It is learning to take away those things that you used to do in the old life that was distracting you from living for the Lord, and adding new good stuff that is in contrast to what you used to do. Many people do that. We can illustrate that in many ways. And there are people who get saved and they go right back doing exactly the same thing they did before they got saved. Then they didn't get saved because they continued to live exactly the same way they did before they, quote, made a profession of faith. To live a holy life. So then, why is holiness, if holiness is so basic to the Christian life, why do we not experience it more in our daily living? Why do so many Christians feel constantly defeated in their struggle with sin? Why do the Church of Jesus Christ so often seem to be more confronted or conformed to the world around it than to God? And that happens. Peter tells us how we are to arrive at this holiness. So the question is, if we are to be that way, how do we arrive at that? In other words, a Christian struggles with sin, and then Here's Peter saying, let me help you figure out how you can begin to live holy. If I could tell you how you could have $1 million, none of you can because you're too old. My father-in-law says, if you start saving money for your child early, by the time he retires, he can be a millionaire. There's a plan to doing that. There is a plan that God has that you can learn to live a holy life. It doesn't come automatically. Verse 14 gives us one of the answers, not fashioning yourself according to the former lust in your ignorance. Don't act like you used to. Don't act like you used to. Not fashioning yourself. Notice the text. Here and in Romans 12:2, the outward pattern in contrast with the inward change. To form together, to conform, rules of conduct, even in a religious perception. To pattern one's action or life after. And reminds these Christians that obedience to God and holiness of life are radically different from a life that follows natural, that is, non-Christians. Desires whenever they leave doing God's will is the opposite of doing what the remaining sin makes us feel like doing. If you, prior to your salvation, were engaged in your ignorance in things of the world, and they were pulling you down, and you've done it for a long period of time, just because you get saved on Monday doesn't mean you're going to quit on Tuesday. Say you've cussed all your life and used God's name in life all the time. Well, it's not, your conversation needs to be holy, so you've got to quit that, but it doesn't mean you're going to quit on Tuesday if you got saved on Sunday. You following me? Yeah. You will struggle at your life pattern that you've had. That's the reason that Ecclesiastes says it's good for a person to be saved when they're young because they won't want to do it. I have no problem with, I don't smoke, drink, cuss, and run around with girls that do. I don't have that problem. You know why? Never did it. If you've never done it, you don't struggle with it. Right? But if I was raised in that atmosphere all of my life, and I got saved at 25 or 35, guess what? Those patterns are still going to be there. And once I learned, well, the pattern that I'm living, I did in my ignorance. If I'd been smart, I'd have quit doing all that stuff. But I got in the habit of doing it. Now, as a Christian, I realize I shouldn't be doing that because it's not glorifying the God, and secondly, it's not helping me as a person or in my body. So every morning you get up, you've had a habit for 35 years, you still want to do it today, the week you get saved. I mean, that's no question. It may be cheating, lying, it may be whatever you've done all your life. It's not easy to get over it. And what happens is Satan will say to you, I thought you got saved. I thought you got saved. You're doing the same things you did before you got saved. And guess what? You must not be saved. And you still have the same desires to do it when you were sitting out. The Satan will throw it up to you. And say, you really didn't get saved. You really like doing what you're doing. Come on now. And he will convince you, and you will feel so guilty, because Satan wants you to feel guilty that you're not a Christian because you're doing it. Sometimes it takes 2 days to quit. Sometimes it takes 2 years to quit. The fun thing about it is people like to hide it. Some of you do things that until somebody told me you did it, I never even realized you did it. And you say, now who do you know about me that I don't know? It doesn't matter what I know about you. It doesn't. I don't care what. I mean, that's not the issue. You know. I saw Jimmy Grant, he watches Days of Our Lives. I mean,
Oh,
oh, so that was gossip.
that is what
Oh, okay.
I do.
But what I'm saying is, we all, you know, the reason you hide what you do is because you feel guilty of doing it.
I was like something.
You know, and what I'm trying to say is, then Satan makes us act like that's sin.
Yeah, sure he does.
Sin is trying to hide it. You know, what I'm trying to say is, you struggle with what you know you shouldn't do, and Satan makes you feel guilty that you do it, and then you give up on your salvation. You say, "Well, I can't live this way," but that's not what you're supposed to do, because you can be saved. Because watch this a lot. All right. Now,
I do.
that's not sin. Don't get me wrong. It's not that is not sin. Don't allow your life to be fashioned after your former lust. According to the former lust, in, notice it says in your ignorance, right?
Yeah.
Ignorance. Let's talk about that a minute. Talking about the Jews who had a real zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. They were ignorant. Talking about Gentiles, they were in darkness. Their minds were darkened, and they were ignorant of the truth of God. A person that's not saved doesn't have a Christian mind. You say to them, "I don't think you need to be doing that." And they'll say, "Why?" And that's true. They don't know why they should be doing this. Because our mind is darkened to the spiritual matters. That's understandable. Ignorance of God and His ways. The lost person doesn't follow God's pattern of living. How come you don't do that? How come you don't do that? Don't ask a lost person that, because they're not stupid. They're blind to the truth. You follow me? They try to get a lost person to understand God's ways. I put on my Facebook today I think on Rivers of Joy. There's this girl sitting at the desk, and she said, "Why?" She's at trial. I think it was B.S.'s sister, and she was saying, "Why? Why have you arrested me? Why am I in court? Why?" They all say that, and in their mind, that's what they really believe. Why? And until God changes their nature, changes their attitude, they're not going to change. And what we say, they're just plain stupid. No, they're ignorant. They're ignorant of God's ways because they're blinded. Former, the word former, that is pre-Christian state. Lust, passion. When passion dominates our pattern of life, the sense of sinful desires, which lead people to a direct disobedience of God's law.